Morning, fish keepers. Cam here from the fish room. We've done it again. We've done Friday on another short week. How good? It's hot, but it's good. We'll take it. All right. So today we've got ourselves some more guests. A guest sitting in the back ring. So let's push some buttons. We'll bring up John and we'll bring up Nick. Good morning,
Hello.
good evening, good afternoon. How are we all?
All good?
All good. Yeah.
Everybody's happy?
Yeah.
Cool.
We've had some good chats in the background, before the stream. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us. It is much appreciated.
No problems.
Cool. All right. So what got you involved and interested in keeping fish?
Probably my father actually had fish. And so growing up as I was a toddler, and some of my earliest memories were just looking up at this fish tank. Mm-hmm. And I'd spend hours just plonked in front of the fish tank, and I just looking up, absolutely fascinated. And so the first aquarium, had some plastic plants, a big sort of rock ornament with holes in it, complete with a little crocodile that opened its mouth with the air. The classic. Maybe I think there was a diver ornament, and that was brilliant. And so I have these memories of sort of the guppy neon tetra combo, and so those were probably some of my earliest memories of fish. Mm-hmm. And then growing up, of course, I'd help my father with sort of the maintenance and picking the fish from the store. And so those were, cherished memories. And then we progressed to live plants. I think we got the first live plants were Ambulia and Anubias, which we kept in the pot. So we're doing quite well. Tank was way overstocked. I think I had 1 million platies. Our long-tailed. I still have a very big soft spot for the long-tailed, the guppies, the fancy guppies, the cobra guppies. Because we lived overseas in Hong Kong. So fish were actually quite cheap. Which was terrible for a kid, because, I'd pick out what I want and I'd get it. And there's no sort of like, have you got the right tank, or what's your, the kind of questions you get asked maybe in New Zealand, if you're in a good store. So it was just unrestrained buying.
I was going to say no impulse control, but that's from the other end of it, of course.
Yeah, well, you could argue that it wasn't up to me to make those calls as a kid. So I mean, I bought what I liked, and I actually had 2 fish books though, and so I love reading. I love reading then, still love reading now. And so I read them cover to cover. I'd read about the requirements of all the fish. However, that didn't stop me from making poor decisions. I'd, I'd like to think I've progressed a lot since then. But I was a terrible fish keeper. I was the worst. I've recollections of going to the fish store, and so in some of the big fish markets, they'll have bags of fish hanging up. So so there'd be this entire street of sort of St. Edward Street in Hong Kong, and there'd be store after store of just fish or other exotic sort of animals, or these pet stores, and they'd have bags hanging up, and I remember pointing to one. It's like, I want those ones, and it was Amazon puffers.
Wow.
And so it was Amazon puffers, and they would have been like less than $5 New Zealand, something like that. So ridiculously cheap for a bag of them. And this is probably the only time I've ever actually gotten advice from the fish store, because I pointed to them and he went, moa, moa, which is no, like these, they bite, not good for you, you know? And he was giving me all this advice. And I went, nah, I'm having them. Advice is, I don't know, I've been 6 or 7 or something. I got these pufferfish, and they were terrible. They killed everything, including themselves, because it was quite a small tank. Looking back, like seeing the pictures, I thought it was quite big at the time, but looking back, it must have been probably about a 60 centimeter tank. Might be a bit less than that.
So very small.
Yeah, and quite a square, you know, the one with the hood and kind of curved glass. Yeah, almost like an Aqua One style tank. But it served me well. I learned a lot. I kept all sorts of things, not just fish, lizards as well.
Cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
just going back to the street that had all of the bags of fish on it. I know plenty of people would have seen videos of that, but can you describe that a little bit more? Like how, from your memory, sort of how long was it and how many bags of fish were hanging around?
I mean, the bags were, so they did have proper aquariums, you know, they did have aquariums where fish were in, but oftentimes outside the store, because there's just so many people walking past, it was more efficient for them to, you know, they'd bag the fish up that morning and it would be pay and walk away. So it would be like a, you know, at most a sort of 10-second interaction. Yeah, so it's almost like fast food for fish. So, but the streets, so I can only recall St. Edward Street, but there were actually multiple streets off that one street. And so, I mean, as long as you could look, I mean, it would be a good 100 meters or so, maybe even longer than that, of just, and it wasn't just, it was a majority fish stores. And I don't know what it's like that now. I assume it'd be very similar, but you'd see all sorts of things like snapping turtles, soft-shelled turtles, tortoises, any sort of, I think I saw a basilisk, so that's the lizard that runs on water. Chameleon. Cool. I would have loved to have one of those. You know, the standard, you know, bearded dragon, snakes, hamsters, anteater.
No way.
Yeah, no, so I don't know how legal a lot of these animals were. So Hong Kong's, I guess, known for a lot of animal trafficking goes through there. So you often see some really interesting animals. You never know what you're going to see, and so you'd see all sorts of turtles and birds. And so I think the fish market, there's actually a separate bird market. I think back in the day they had bird flu go through. It was it was quite bad through there. Only because I only recall having taken a long time off school due to a bird flu sort of epidemic, you know, in Hong Kong. So it was a big scare. And yes, so it was definitely a hot spot for potential viruses and just because of all, you know, everything goes through Hong Kong. It's a hub.
Yeah. So St. Edward Street, is that the only place like that?
No.
Or is there other streets that have all the fish on the bags? And
there are other streets off that one street. That's just the one I always remember, because I'd always be like, I want to go to St. Edward Street. I want to. That wasn't my local fish store. I had another one that was in a fish market. And I remember going there with my dad and picking out, you know, fish from there. And it's always a bit of a shock. The prices when you go from Hong Kong to New Zealand, you know, you go from sort of, you can get 100 fish for like $5 New Zealand to like, you know, $5 New Zealand won't buy you a fish here. So
Well, I mean, price differences in Scotland, I'm based in a town called Livingston, and say a normal fish that would be about £5, which I can't. It's about $11 or $12 or something, I think.
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, is half the price when you go 20 miles to the west into Glasgow. They have them at half the price, and they all come from the same suppliers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's inland,
Oh.
and that's crazy how the price difference works, but I don't understand it.
It's
I will
economy
say,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd just say that when you buy fish, you're buying fish knowing that a good percentage are going to die. You know, you buy your bag of, 30 neons knowing that, 25% would probably die. And a lot of that was probably likely because I wasn't the best fish keeper at the time. I was pretty inexperienced. But I would say, the conditions a lot of these fish are subjected to are pretty poor, like, and not just the fish, like, you'd see snapping turtles on this tiny little tote of water, trapped in there, and you don't know how long. They say it's temporary, but what is temporary? How long is it sitting there before it's actually sold?
Did they come out the bags at the end of the day into a barrel, or?
I believe so. I believe they actually take them out of, because obviously they don't want to kill their fish, so I do think I do believe they take them out of the bags at the end of the day. Although that's not something I ever saw, but I do believe they would do that only because
it would make sense for them all to go back into holding tanks and then get rebagged the next day, sort of thing, as opposed to living in a bag for what could be 4, 5, 6 days if they don't get purchased, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. But you'd have streets also dedicated to specific fish, like goldfish, like pond.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah, no, so I do recall like smaller, side streets where there was just goldfish. So you just see 100 goldfish packed into this big tank, and I'm sure you've probably seen some of the videos of gold, these, and I do recall seeing guppies. Guppies were quite big, tanks full of all sorts of exotic guppies. Yeah. So yeah, no, I bought a lot of different fish. So I've had being a bad fish keeper. I'm trying to think of what's the most interesting fish I've ever kept. I don't think funnily enough, I don't think I kept anything particularly too exotic that you couldn't get here in New Zealand. Besides maybe Amazon puffers. Like, there wasn't anything that I can recall that I'm like, oh, that was amazing. Yeah, because it was Amazon puffers, and there was another puffer species I kept briefly, but they never survived that long. I bought angelfish early on; they never did well, so I tend to avoid them. Trying to think, it was mainly guppies, platies. We caught gobies, some gobies from a local pond river. And shrimp, as I was telling John earlier. And so not only were we were noticing after these were like sort of clear shrimp, quite transparent, some boring shrimp. And we were noticing a lot of the fish. We saw slowly not only losing fish, but a lot of the fish were getting like quite scraggly fins. And we couldn't quite figure it out. We'd assumed that it was one of the other fish bullying, because I think we had kept tiger barbs in the past, so I think we'd had bad experiences with them and just assumed that it would be very similar. So it would probably be another fish, but we only really had guppies and platies and stuff, so we couldn't quite figure it out. And it was only till just by chance I happened to be walking past the aquarium, and there was this shrimp perched on top of our rock ornament with the holes in it right at the top, and it was catching these fish and hanging on, and we assumed, so we had these carnivorous shrimp or semi, but it might have been because we weren't feeding them properly, it was desperation. And what were you telling me about John? I think John said something about how he'd kept some.
We bought a shrimp one time, and they were called long arm shrimp, and they were just sold as like a normal shrimp. But it wasn't until we started to see similar, we started to see these shrimp grabbing tetras and almost pulling them down, that we realised that they are not good shrimp and they had to go. But even trying to catch them was terrifying because you're putting the net in and all of a sudden these things have got their claws up and they're like, come on then. For this shrimp, maybe about that size. Don't know if yours were the same.
Yeah,
About that.
they're probably about that size because we caught them at a local. So we had a Disneyland in Hong Kong, and adjacent to Disneyland they have Disneyland. I think it's called Discovery Park. They had some park adjacent to Disneyland that Disneyland owned, and there was this sort of artificial lake, and that's where we were catching these shrimp in. And I think we had these gobies as well. Gobies they're very, very similar to like cockabullies that we have here. And so they weren't eating the fish, but we found we could feed them ham. So probably not the best food to be feeding fish. Pollutes the aquarium, but so we had quite a bit of fun just dropping in little pieces of ham and then they'd munch
cool.
them. Yeah. That's how I started getting into fish. And then it was when we moved to New Zealand, I had quite a couple of years without any kind of fish, so didn't keep any fish. I did have frogs for a wee bit.
Nice.
So I loved, I'd found some whistling tree frog eggs, and then I'd raised them up, and I think I had like an army of about 100 or so little froglets. And I released them back where I'd found the eggs, and it was only until a couple of years later that I'd found out that in New Zealand, I'm probably snitching on myself here, is it's illegal. I hadn't known that. My only thought was I've got these eggs, I've grown them up, and I'm now giving back by releasing them where I'd found them, kind of thing. And I've raised up these froglets, and I'd kept a few behind, so I thought I was doing a good deed. But later found out, I think I'd put it on a Facebook group or something, and someone said you probably shouldn't be saying that. It's not. It's
oops.
Yeah, it was a bit of an oops. Oh no. But I'd like to think it's far away from any sort of native frog. It's a kind of a degraded, area. It's not a, that's my only sort of saving grace. And then from there, I think I had a lot of memories of the. It's illegal, yeah, it is. Yeah, but I think I've had a lot of memories of fish. So and so I was constantly thinking about trying to get a fish tank again. And in particular, I had memories of while a lot of the shops down these streets were pretty I don't know what the word is for it, that rudimentary, like basic. There were a couple of stores that were actually quite, high end, fancy. I don't think we bought anything from them. And so these stores were sort of half marine, half freshwater. And I do recall going in there and seeing these little zebra plecos. And that just blew my mind, these little baby zebra plecos. And they were I think they were like 200, 400. I don't know. They were pricey, and they also had an aquascape tank. I didn't know what aquascaping was until much later, but I'd walked up and it was just blew my mind. They had sand, so it only ever kept sort of gravel, the standard gravel substrate. And so seeing sand in a tank blew my mind. So they had white sand, and they had like a carpet, like a semi-carpet of might have been hair grass, it might have been something else. I think it was hair grass, and they had shrimp, in the grass, and that just blew my mind. And so I've had these snippets of, guppies in the ambulia and shrimp in the hair grass. And so that kept coming back to me every now and then, and made me decide, I want to get back into fish keeping. And I think it was just on YouTube, and I accidentally stumbled across, I think it was the Green Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know them, yeah.
Yeah, I just stumbled across like his channel just randomly. I don't know if it was recommended or if I was searching for it, and I watched one video, and I was, if you've ever watched, for the viewers out there, search up the Green Machine Aquascaping. If you watch one video, you're just drawn in. It's very relaxing as well.
Yeah.
you know, the narrator.
Especially the shallow tanks that he does. They're fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, you can just sit there and you just sort of just watch. And so suddenly I'd watched all of the videos in his channel. I just kept clicking on the next one, and I just suddenly became like, I was like, I need to do this. I need to, because I think to an extent everyone sort of aquascapes. Like, well, not really, but like the essence of creating something that is pleasing to the eye and suits the needs of the fish, you know. So, which is, I think, what some people say is the essence of aquascaping. You know, creating something attractive and trying to, you know, harmonious with the fish and natural. And to an extent, I think everyone does that. It's just what level. I think, like, even a beginner aquarist is thinking, oh, this ornament looks quite nice. I'll put it here and I'll move my plastic plant there. And I think that hole in the ornament will provide for the fish and they'll be able to swim in and out. And so I think for the most part, you know, it was just going to be a natural step once I think for the most part, once people are exposed to that level of sort of aquascaping, you're instantly like, wow. First, I didn't even know this was a thing. Despite the fact that I'd seen some in very early childhood growing up, but it's sort of like, wow, I didn't know we could even get plants like that. You know, I didn't know that existed. You know, I didn't even know this was possible. And yeah.
I think I was the same. But growing up, it was Amazon swords, and that was pretty much it. You know, and they were practical. They were never meant to be aesthetically pleasing. They were just there because fish liked them, and that was about as much I knew.
Yeah. So I just started watching all of his videos, and I rewatched them, and then I got depressed because I was like, well, I can't get any of this stuff in New Zealand. Like, you can't get ADA, Amazonia. To be fair, we couldn't even, at the time of watching it, I don't think we could even get aqua soil or the substrates he used, at least not at a affordable. I mean, it's still quite expensive now, but like, I saw it on some website. It was like $200 for a bag or something ridiculous. It was, you know, you couldn't get aqua soil. And so then I was like, well, I can't do this. I don't have, you know, I didn't know enough. I only knew that his process. But from him, I then started watching others like Aqua Design Amano. So I looked into him because he often references Amano as being his inspiration. And then from Aqua Design Amano, I think went to George Farmer.
Yeah.
And then from George Farmer, I got onto, I think it was MD Fish Tanks. So I think I started watching MD since the first video with George Farmer when he was just in his little shed. And so that was really fascinating. And at that point, I think I'd already started my first aquascape, which was, it was terrible. It was terrible.
At least you're honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think that's the reality for most people. Well, maybe not most people, but your first attempt at anything, whether that be learning how to throw a ball, cooking, or, you know, aquascaping, like any skill, your first attempt's never going to be great. You know, and I think you should just keep that in mind. And some people are going to be much better or have the resources available to them. And so, you know, there's always going to be some people who are much better at it at the start than you. But I don't think it mattered to me. I think I enjoyed the process, like regardless of how good it looked. Because I think I started off with a piece of wood, a Java fern, some Ambulia gravel, and that was my sort of first, you know, since being aware of aquascaping, that was my first sort of attempt. And I'm a bit gutted I don't have photos of it because I think it would be great to sort of show people, you know, this is my first go at it. Don't beat
Yeah.
yourself up too much about it.
It's been a progressive movement from here to here, not just straight here.
Yeah. And some people
Yeah.
can do that because especially now, you've got so many products available to us compared to when I first started. You could just buy this, buy that, if you got the money, and you could start off with something much better than me. But, regardless of, I think, where you start, there's always going to be a progression upwards, if you keep at it. Yeah, I think that's just the natural process with anything. You're going to get better over time. Your first one's never going to be great, or as good as you can do, but you just sort of enjoy it and you make mistakes and kind of just keep going. And I think I had the benefit of, I'd watched aquascaping on YouTube for probably about a year before I even did it. So I think
Wow.
it was a bit different in the sense that I did actually kind of know what to do. I couldn't quite execute on it,
Yeah.
And getting plants, obviously, it was a bit more of a budget. Like getting the quantity of plants that a lot of these sort of aquascaping YouTubers use is not as realistic for a lot of people. Like you're not going to spend $200 so you can fill up your tank just like that. So it's yeah. So I think what I did is I bought a little bundle of plants. So I bought a mixed pack of trade meat. It was Rotala, rotundifolia, that chainsaw, the Zealandia one, some Hygrophila, and I'd already had the Anubias and Java fern. And what I realized was to get the quantity that I wanted, I'd need to sort of propagate it.
Yeah.
And the system that I had with the tank was pretty crap at growing plants. So I had a wee 20-liter tank, and I filled it up with like clay soil just from the garden. Just found some big chunks. So I figured clay would sink, and that's sort of what you'd find at the bottom of a riverbed, as opposed to sort of the leafy, higher organic stuff. So I just filled that up in a 20-liter tank. Filled it up with so it was about 2 inches of water above the dirt. Planted the plants, put glide wrap over it, and put it in a sunny position. And I think within a couple months, it was completely, the Java fern had taken off. I had normal and the Windelov one, and I had Rotala throughout. I had a heap of plants. I mean, even the Anubias had taken off. And so I then used that to do another escaping attempt with a lot more success because I just had a lot more plants. And so for some people, that's what I would recommend, is setting up a little propagation, aquarium.
A farm tank.
A farm tank, exactly, for very little cost. It was dirt from my garden, a spare 20-liter tank, some glad wrap, and water. And that was how I got a decent number of plants without actually spending too much. And
that's a genius idea, really.
Yeah. Well, it was just, and then I think I transitioned that to an outside tub. So I had a lot of excess plants. I had a big, actually it was a spare tank that I used to grow up my tadpoles in. And so then I did the same thing outside, except without the glide wrap, and all those plants took off. And I still have it today. I mean, it's mostly dwarf Sagittarius at the moment, but it's a fantastic way of growing plants, especially if you don't have the budget to spend, or even like plant availability has gotten a lot better, I think.
Significantly.
As well, like especially with tissue cultures, you have a lot more access to rare plants as well. So they do come at a higher price, but you have higher access to rare plants, to what plants that we couldn't even get here.
Yeah,
so
2 years ago, the game's been totally changed over the last 18 months or so. Like we couldn't even get most of these, or if they were here, they were in such small quantities. There was only sort of 1 or 2 people with them.
Yes, and you'd be charged.
They're at a chance. They could charge more, but there was a chance of dying out as well. So like that's just been opened up.
Yeah. And So I haven't actually been aquascaping for a tremendously long time. I think it's probably only maybe 5 or 6 years. Like it's not been, or maybe a bit longer than that, maybe seven. But yeah, it hasn't been a tremendously long time. When I got back into fish keeping in New Zealand, I didn't start off with scaping. It was a Aqua One 980, and I had a pirate ship. It came with one, and some plastic plants, I think. But I think by then I'd already decided plastic plants weren't quite for me. I wanted to try some live ones, so I think I tossed them out. And the first 2 fish that I bought were neon tetras and a Borneo sucker or a hillstream loach. And that same hillstream loach I bought about 8 years ago is still with me. And
awesome.
Right here. Yeah. So I think that covers how I got into the hobby and how I started aquascaping. So I think that answers your question.
I've noticed of them, your hillstream starting about as you've been talking, they've been catching my eye a little bit. They're quite cool.
Yeah. I definitely set it up so that they could, you'd be able to maybe see them on this rock here. Just
Definitely seen a couple
wiggling about.
Braxton would like to know if your first aquascape was a disaster.
No, because I feel like I think for it to be a disaster, I'd have to have had quite good expectations of what I was like going for. Like I don't think I set my expectations pretty low, and I was happy with it. It wasn't as great as like what I'd seen online, but for the first week, I was like ecstatic. I had this log, and I had a live plant, and it was one of my first tanks being back, and I was stoked. I feel as though there are a lot of maybe more experienced aquascapers, even stores that can kind of they push a certain standard on people. Like, if it's not done in this way, they're going to be devastated. These people are going to turn away from the hobby because they've got an unhealthy plant. But I think sometimes what's forgotten is that when you're starting out, your standards are like what makes you happy is a lot lower than like, I was happy with an unhealthy Java fern. Like it wasn't the biggest of deals. Like the standard for what's good and what makes you happy and what you're proud of is very different. And I wouldn't say it was a disaster. It wasn't the best. It was just gravel. I mean, I think it's a bit of a difference between a beginner fish keeper trying aquascaping versus someone who's been fish keeping for a while and has started aquascaping. I think there's that distinction. So like, I mean, I could keep the fish alive at this point, and the tank was half decent. It wasn't amazing, but I wouldn't say it was a disaster. No. I think the other thing was I didn't start off with aqua soil, and I didn't start off with a highlight. I think some people run into issues with algae because there's that nutrient overload and maybe a lack of understanding of what to do. Maybe they don't follow the instructions on the bag. So I think for me as well, I think having a shitty light, I mean, it wasn't terrible. It definitely grew plants, but it definitely prevented. I don't think I had any algae issues starting out, which is maybe a bit different to other people. But it was more so I could barely grow plants, let alone algae. So, yeah.
I think we've almost all been there before, or most people have been before.
Yeah. So no, it wasn't a disaster. I enjoyed it. It was one of my first tanks. It wasn't the best, but no, not a disaster.
Yeah. I also found it really interesting that Green Aqua was your first basic YouTube channel, or first foray into it, because it was also the first channel that I found on YouTube. I'm not sure if it was the first channel I found to do with aquariums or growing plants, but it's right in that sort of first era. I don't think there was a heck of a lot of people doing YouTube for aquariums at that time, and it just mesmerized me as well. And I very clearly remember a friend of mine, I watched them for a little while and then stopped watching. And then a friend of mine said, "Oh, have you checked out this channel?" I watched it again. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I think if you haven't seen them, it's well worth just finding their channel and just sitting down and enjoying, because it is just beautiful aquarium keeping, plant keeping, fish keeping from a very long time ago. And it's just, I think, set the standard for so many people that are now where they are now. And
Absolutely.
YouTubing
I
and
think
everything.
the way he produced the videos as well was really quite high quality, and that made a difference. I think he was one of my first ones as well. He used to be a shop, didn't he? They closed the shop down, and I think he was one of the UK representatives for ADA for a while.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I was devastated when he stopped sort of posting his videos, and I learned that he's closing the shop. So I was really invested in seeing more aquariums from him, and even though I couldn't do it myself at the time, I was like, I was adamant that I wanted to do something like that one day.
Have you watched the Cinescaper before?
Yes, I have actually.
Yeah,
it gives me very similar vibes.
Yeah, he is, isn't he?
Yeah. So I love watching his videos. He doesn't have a huge quantity compared to maybe like an MD, but every video is brilliantly
really cool.
produced.
He's a cine. He makes film. That's his actual job. He produces movies and things. So I think that plays into everything he does on YouTube.
Methodology.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
A cinematographer, I think he's called.
But that's how I can't, when I advise people, I can only advise them on like my experiences. I can't really say what's going to be best for you per se. Like, and so when people ask me, well, how do I get good, or how would you start aquascaping? I'd probably just say, just start watching. Just watch. There's a huge quantity of videos on YouTube. And just that's how I started. I started just watching and actually learning to love this hobby that I couldn't even participate in. But I think you can progress in a tremendous way without actually doing aquascaping, like in terms of understanding, by just watching videos and seeing how different people do it. And I think the benefit of someone like an MD is, if you've watched from a very early, like in his earliest stages, is you get to see a lot of the mistakes and the editing and the next time I won't do this, and which is very real to what most people are like. It's a very much trial error, copy what someone else is doing and edit it to your needs.
Put your own
twist
vibe
on
onto it.
Yeah. But I think
you're right. There was a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more mistakes and learnings. It's slightly rawer a couple of years back.
Yeah. So I would say copying would be one of my number one tips for some aquascapers and I think that's a fundamental part of learning. If you're learning mathematics or speech, is you're copying, you're imitating what others are doing. And there's so many tutorials online that are set up for just that. You can just follow along with each step. You can just, if you bought everything that they did, you probably end up with very similar results, and you followed their process. So there's that opportunity to copy what other people have done and just watch what they do, watch their mistakes, go back through their playlists. MD now is obviously, quite a number of years into it, but you got to see him experiment with one of his first dirted tanks. He put in a heap of fertilizers, and I was thinking he's putting in too much. And sure enough, what ended up happening was his tank went gross, the plants died. But because he's got so many videos, and a lot of them are, good, a lot of people don't get to that video. It's 1 in 50 that he's produced. So a lot of people think have this, and other aquascapers, professional ones, a lot of people get this perception that there's never a disaster and that everything's going to go perfect. And That's not the reality. Especially since when most people start out, they don't copy everything per se. They may do, they may not understand the importance of how dependent one thing is on the other. Like if you have, say, aqua soil, doing those regular water changes is essential, so they might do the aqua soil and the light, but they might not do the water changes. And so then disaster, or it could be something else, or having a heap of light but no CO2. So yeah.
Well, there's bound to have been a video created like this, but what I'd like to see one day is someone that's entering a competition for a competition scape, from record it or photograph it, time lapse it from day one all the way through to obviously after entry, after judging. So it goes through, you see the whole period of going through the overgrowing, the trimming, the overgrowing, the shaping, the molding, the potential melt, the potential algae, all that from all the way through to show the true of what it is to develop. It's not just this gorgeous aquarium that's taken a perfect shot in the right set of time with everything else that goes with it, if that makes sense. It probably has been, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, I think there are quite a number of videos, at least time lapses. I think there's quite a number of them. It's knowing where to look and trying to get them. And that's part of the reason I do. One of the things I want to do I've done with the Aquascaping group in New Zealand is I wanted to be able to show these people without them having to like go through these other Facebook groups or on YouTube. It's one place where you can just look and there it is. So I think there are time lapses of people's tanks. And Rio Watanabe, he's a YouTuber.
Yes.
Japanese fellow. Yeah. So he's entered in some competitions. And so if you watch his videos, you'll see some of the process of his algae issues and then how he addresses that. I think one of his latest ones, maybe not the latest one, but before that, he showed the disaster of having too much light, not enough fast growing plants, I think, and the algae disaster and how he fixed that. And then I think he takes you from where the beginning right up to the final photo and how little tips and tricks that they did to take the final photo. And another YouTube channel I would look into is Steve Scapes. So Stephen Chong is quite a renowned aquascaper, at least at the IAPLC level. So he's probably one of my favorite aquascapers, and actually his tank is the banner. I'd asked him if I could use his photo. Is the banner of the Aquascaping group. So that aquascape that you see is his. So his videos are very much, if you've done any kind of design at school or something, the way he from conception to execution is very much the design process. So you start off with some sort of vague idea, like it might be spring or happy or sad, and then you kind of branch out and then you converge. So I think, for example, the banner one is it's a spring themed aquarium. So I think he had a piece of wood that he really liked and he wanted to use that, and he had an idea, I want something fresh, and something that could be like spring water, clear. And then I think this is an approach that I take as well, is you'll start somewhere vague and then you'll research. So he looked at spring habitats, clear water habitats, videos, pictures, previous scapes, other scapes with similar themes. And then from there, then you converge, then you take the things that you want and you come up with a composition, and then, they're the final, you select your plants, boom. So I would recommend watching if you're already at that sort of intermediate aquascaping level. I don't think it's much benefit for like the beginner, but someone who's wanting to take it to that, or just having an understanding of that design process. And I think what I like about him is he's very specific in how he breaks down an aquascape. So it's like, if you're not artistically inclined, you can still understand it. Because some people just do this, it looks good, boom. But like, if you're not like artistically inclined, like that might not come so easy to. So having actually someone break it down, like I put it here because it's within this ratio and that looks good. Or I think aquascapers in general are getting much better at just breaking down their process, especially the likes of like Green Aqua. Like, I mean, even the Green Machine did that quite a bit, but like, yeah, really breaking it down so that even if you're not the most artistically gifted person, you can, you know, you can have a good go at it. I mean, it's not rocket science. So
Yeah,
Mm.
having it broken down into stages that somebody can focus on one section of it at a time, it prevents it from becoming an overwhelming process, and allows you to kind of concentrate fully on the design process to get
yeah.
to where you want to be in the end.
And I love that design process, that researching the habitat, and it often starts for me because I'm more of a fish centric. Like I'll start with the fish,
Mhm.
and then I'll branch out and I'll look at for instance, I've got the wild betta tank here, and so I'd already you know seen videos of Southeast Asian, you know, like creeks and swamp beds, and so I looked at pictures of those, and then I'd looked back, and I'd already, you know, I've already quite a portfolio of aquariums and stuff in my head, you know, just sitting there. And so then I picked a composition. Bait that would be my go-to, is find some rough composition that fits what hardscape you have available that you can buy. So I'd sort of copied, I think Ty Streetman did a aquascape for the aquarium gardens, and it was this sort of it was a piece of wood and then like two pieces of big clumps of plants either side, and then quite a carpet, and there's a central focal point. And
Mhm.
so I copied that. Well, I stole that idea. I was like, use that, apply it to a different kind of aquascape. So it's a sort of semi-planted, you know, it's got leaves all over the bottom of it. So yeah, having an original idea, maybe that's your fish, looking at the habitat that's from, looking at other aquascapes that you can take ideas from, and then just, you know, just going for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort
Can you describe or explain to us what composition is?
Oh yeah, no, that's good. So it's just how you decide to organize your hardscape and your plants. So it's about having a balance between, I guess, light and dark, and space and not space. Not space. I don't know. So yeah, so you have like triangular composition. So you have stuff high up and it goes sort of down a bit like a triangle, and you have like concave and convex, or maybe I think at the competition level, V shape. I think like 90% are V-shaped composition.
Yeah.
So it's everything going out and it starts to a point. So if you've done any sort of drawing, like perspective drawing, you'll have big things at the front and then you draw little things to make it look like it's deeper.
Yeah.
So at a competition level, you know, V-shape lends itself to having big stuff out, small stuff in, and a vanishing point, or a vanishing point, or a focal
That's when
point.
you have people that some of the fancy aquascapes have the tree lines coming.
Yeah.
They put the biggest part at the front to create that emphasis and size, and then as it goes in, it comes small like that. So when you've got the V shape, the concave, it allows planting in that fashion much easier, and you can create like the valley base, which could be like the stream or the river that's meant to look like a stream, or
I think it's called
like
forced perspective, or it's giving the illusion of depth.
Yeah, I wrote a blog about all the different styles of aquascapes a while back. It went into all the different kind of official styles of aquascapes.
So if I was
interesting.
So if I was a beginner, that's one of the things I would look into. And there's an article written by ADA that I often send to people, and it's just basic composition, because having just a basic idea of how to lay, it's a bit like if you're ever remodeling or designing a kitchen, they often give you like your U-shaped kitchen, your, I don't know, T-shape, or you'll have like maybe 3 or 4 different sort of basic designs that you then customize and make it your own. But that's very much like aquascaping, and at least that's what I'd recommend for a beginner is picking a composition, because I do find a lot of people can create quite congested looking aquariums. Oftentimes, like it just feels like there's not enough space, and so just having something you can pick, these pre-designed
you can
structures, a skeleton of escape.
A photographer or like a professional sort of artist has already picked these as like the go-to. That's going to give you the nicest balance. Whereas I find if people, even where tanks that people haven't thought about composition, if they're attractive or like quite good looking aquariums, they tend to inadvertently follow some sort of pre-designed composition, whether or not they know it or not. And then tanks that might be described as unattractive or feel congested are ones that don't sort of follow some sort of composition. So it's just something that's naturally someone's gone, these types of shapes look good, let's give them a name. That's how I describe composition. And then we talked about V shape and force perspective. So the V shape is the composition, and then force perspective is another thing that you'd see part of. It's called diorama, I believe, or diorama. That's what some Japanese scapers call it. So it's called the diorama style of aquascaping, where you have force perspective and you're representing much larger scenes. So you might be representing an entire forest or a valley in miniature, and you're using those sort of techniques of putting big things at the front, small things, and especially since the Josh, if anyone's watched, I 100% recommend watching the Josh Sim video with Green Aqua. Since his video, I would say competition aquascaping it's not like unimaginative, but they definitely follow his guidelines, because obviously he won it twice. And I actually saw another professional aquascaper sort of saying after that video he did wonder and sort of suspected that the competition would end up becoming quite similar, like the same, because everyone would have watched that video and then everyone's going to do that same thing. So you have 90% of the competition doing a V-shaped composition with the same sort of layouts, the same. It's just kind of reworked.
I guess with a lot of stuff, you'll pick up on what works, what doesn't, and give the competition aquascapers there to win. So that it will last for so long, and then all of a sudden someone else will come along with something slightly more revolutionary or eye-catching, and then begin raising the level, and then people begin following that trend as well, and we'll just kind of
100%. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who might be against competition aquascaping, but I think it's more so understanding its purpose as opposed to like it's not your everyday aquarium. Like it's not for these aquariums aren't necessarily for you to copy in your home. They're not as much as like some of the criteria is like, I think it's a manageable, a sustainable aquascape. It's not for at least long term. A lot of them aren't. I sort of compare it to a fashion show or runway model. Those fashion shows where they're really just showing concepts, and some of these ideas then get taken and then filtered through your everyday, clothing or everyday fashion. So the way I see aquascaping is it's a medium by which you can push the hobby to its extremes and get certain ideas that can then be filtered through sort of normal aquascaping, I guess.
So I guess that's a really good way of looking at it, because the contest aquascapes are out of this world. But if you can see one particular plant out of that award-winning aquascape, and you think, I really like how they've put that at this specific point of the aquarium, and then you take that to your own normal aquarium and adapt that, then it's grown the aquarium, it's grown the hobby, isn't it? By just that one particular point that you've taken.
it's about introducing ideas to the hobby, a bit like, another analogy would be concept cars. So a lot of them aren't practical or, cost effective or sustainable, but it's introducing, maybe there's that one feature in that car that then gets put down in the production line for, in 5 years time. So you'll see ideas from competition aquascaping then getting filtered through, like, just normal, people take things, and that's how I look at a lot of, when I'm looking at aquascapes online. I've got my imaginary shopping cart, and I'm taking, oh, I like that, put that there. Oh, I like that, I'm going to use that later, and I just have those just sitting there. And so I think it's important to sort of distinguish between competition and just normal, your home aquascape. I do feel as though sometimes the competition aquascaping is put on this super like high pedestal of like, that's the thing, but it's a different thing entirely. And what makes a successful aquascaping at a competition level, like the rules by which determine that tank's amazing, are not the same rules that you set for yourself. So you might value. So these are the best aquascapes under those conditions. So it's under these are aquariums that are built from one perspective, as in front on. You're only going to look at from there in this specific camera angle, and it's going to look amazing from there. I mean, it's not to say it's not going to look, but in the home, for instance, my aquarium, I've designed it so that I can walk around it. It's a two face, so it's somewhat lacking from the front on, at least not these two, but the 120p that I've got. You're in a home, you might be designing it from multiple angles. And for you, one of the criteria for success might be it's low care, easy maintenance. That might be the best aquascape for you under those conditions. So the best aquascape, so I think it's important to make that distinction between best aquascape under those competition rules or under those specific criteria. And I think the likes of Josh Sim, in his intro to his sort of lecture on competition aquascaping, this is competition aquascaping. These rules are not for everyone, but you can take some of these ideas like shadows and having dominant hardscape and apply that to your own home or whatever you want to do. That might be competition.
Yeah, that all makes absolute sense. We've had another question from one of the watchers. Helen would like to know, can you explain the golden ratio and why it is important?
No. I'll be honest, I don't know a tremendous amount about the golden ratio. I just know it's a sort of a third. You have, your center mark, and then it's 2 points of either side, about a third way in. And you have it at the top, and then it's something to do with photography, and it looks good if you have it there. Like I think oftentimes, like you don't necessarily need to know the science behind why, or like such an in-depth of why something is great. You just need to know that it
works.
It works. It's a bit like when you're starting off, you don't need to understand the whole nitrogen cycle or like the in-depth, microbiology behind it. You kind of just, sometimes you can just break it down into, if I do this, it looks good. If I do this, it works. You can just break it down into processes without necessarily having such a in-depth understanding of why it is. So when I'm aquascaping, I do keep that in mind. It's having a big structure off center. So if you look at just even the rock one, I mean, you probably can't see, but there's photos online of it. I've kept that in mind. So you got the big rock on the golden ratio. So that's just off center. I think, off center and high up. And there's another one off center. That's how I look at it. It's just off center, move it there. And if you look at enough aquariums, you kind of just, I don't know, just naturally, you're probably more naturally inclined to do that sort of thing. So if you've got say a vanishing point, you're going to put it off center, and you might put it centrally, but for the most part, if you're going to take that picture front on, it's important that's the golden ratio point. So yeah. I don't know a tremendous amount about it. I just sort of do it, and it looks good. And
does the job.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You just know that's kind of what looks good. It's what your humans sort of find attractive. And
Yeah, I think you're just more inclined when you're putting the biggest rock in. You don't want it in the center because well, for me, I just think I don't want it to look symmetrical.
yeah,
So I want
exactly.
it to pop it off to the side slightly, and it's something that just happens for most of the time anyway.
Yeah, and then of course there's exceptions in everything, right? So you might have an islandscape, so it might be in the center, or you might have. I saw a beautiful ADA one where they created this sort of halo, and so it was a central vanishing point. There was an ibigumi where the plant sort of circled around. It was a central. So yeah, but then again, the criteria by which you're being judged on that aquarium or how might be very different to a competition. So if it's just in your home, that looks amazing. Whereas in a competition, you might be not forced, but I don't know, that's what's favored.
I think with competitions as well, they very much are an artistic contest.
Yeah, 100%.
You're creating art, whereas in the home, what you're creating is something that looks nice in your home. And there is a very distinctive difference between that, because the discipline when it comes to your home aquarium compared to a contest is miles apart. And you can apply that to any hobby. Painting, for example, if you're painting something to hang up in your bedroom and you've not got a judge that's going to be judging that, you can do whatever you want. But if you're entering a contest based on rules and regulations, then you have to work within those guidelines. And aquascaping's not any different.
And then there's another thing that I'm really trying to push, and this is sort of what I want. This is something I've been kind of somewhat careful of, and something I wanted to really put on the New Zealand hobby is the fish keeping aspect. I do feel like on the international scale, especially overseas with green aqua, like the fish are sort of like an unfortunate accessory at times. Like they'll say things like, "Oh, the aquascaping is about the harmony of fish," but very rarely do you actually hear them critique. So they'll be very happy to critique their aquarium on an aesthetic level, but very rarely do you see, well, I've done this for this fish, and that's why it's better for it. Or like, what are the variables in your aquarium that have improved the behavior of your fish? And so that's another thing I think at a competition level. Despite that, I think there is criteria that says, I think it's like 50 points in the secondary screening at the ILPSC for creating the habitat of a fish. But very rarely do you see aquariums that often reflect that, or it's sort of inadvertent.
Yeah.
So like,
it's almost like they've put that rule in there because it's a fish tank that they're.
But it's weird because so there's been a lot of issues with sort of the secondary and primary screening at the competition level. So the primary screening is sort of behind closed doors, so that they pick out, I think, the top 100. And so I think last year a lot of amazing aquascapes got left out that should have just been there. And then there was, talks of bias for Japanese escapers, blah, blah, blah. But I looked at the criteria, and oftentimes you can only judge based on the criteria. And some of the tanks, you could argue, didn't. And so there was a lot of arguing. And my sort of solution to that is make the criteria clearer and invest more points so that there's more of because most of the points were awarded in the primary screening. Invest more points in the things that you value so that there's more of a difference.
Yeah.
So for me, it would be, I'd like to see more sort of aquatic habitat. Like I don't, as much as I like to see the terrestrial scape, and that's something most people, I think it's attractive because that's what most people understand. Most people don't know what an aquatic habitat looks like, or different types, so yeah, you're going to lean towards what you know. But that's the one thing I really want to do in New Zealand is you're not only making it for yourself, but you're also making it for your fish, and that's an enjoyable process. And you're gonna because you're creating something that looks great and gets the most out of the fish. You're going to enjoy your aquarium more. You're going to feel more motivated to maybe put in a bit more effort, and as a consequence, those fish are going to get better
Yeah.
care because you like the look of your tank and you want to be in front of it all the time. And it's that two-way sort of feedback where, you know, now you're getting the best behavior and you get to see these cool things with your fish, and it's interacting with that rock that you placed just as you'd hoped. And
Yeah, but I think Ty Stretman's book that he's been working with George Farmer, and it's due to come out at some point in the next 5 years or
aquatic
something.
habitats.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
keeps getting delayed, but that is kind of merging aquascaping and biotope aquariums together to some extent. So you're creating a
100%.
natural habitat, but with a bit of style.
Yeah, no, and that's actually when he first released the video about that, it was exactly what I have sort of agreed with and how I've
Mhm.
approached it to an extent. And there's no issue with like creating something that's beautiful and then thinking about the fish later, as long as you sort of picking the fish also on the suitability for it, like what variables in your tank fit with the fish, as opposed to it looks nice. You know, a good looking tank isn't always the best tank for that fish. You know,
Mhm.
there's a non-aquascape tank, so something in your, you know, fish room or something, you're just looking at the variables by which that fish needs. So what does it use and what kind of cover does it use? And it might come in the form of like a pipe if it's a pleco or something like that. So you've broken it down into the most basic of variables. You're not thinking about how it looks, you know, it's strictly what's going to bring the most out of that fish for it to breed or whatever. And I think when you do an aquascape, inadvertently, you often create those variables for those fish to live. Like if you've got, say, some rocky structure that looks nice, it may also serve as a great home for the pleco. And so that would be, you know, that's one variable. And so you've ticked that off. But there are occasions where I see aquariums where, especially diorama scapes done in smaller aquariums. So at a competition level, these aquariums might be in like 300 plus liter tanks, you know, at least at the IPLC. These are big tanks. And so it doesn't really matter if 80% of the aquarium is covered with hardscape because they've got nano fish.
Mhm.
You know, they've still got another 100 liters of space. And these nano fish come from these areas where there's dense plants and wood, and these are the kind of fish that are going to swim in and out and explore these areas where oftentimes you see aquariums, or I think I saw one, I don't want to say the Instagram account, but you can create blocks of hardscape and plant by planting, which kind of confine the fish into a very narrow portion of the tank. Like I think a lot of people forget that the front angle is often an illusion. Like the depth that you create is not the reality. You know, like there actually might just be a sliver of space between the hardscape and the front glass. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
actually go all that deep for the fish. And so you see the fish at the front glass and you're like, oh, that's great. But when you then look on from a side angle, sometimes on Instagram, they provide you with the side angle. You see these fish are crammed in between this small space. And it was a tank with some discus. It's
Yep.
120p. So that's, for me, that would be about the minimum I'd want to keep discus in. But on top of that, they've then put these two island structures with hardscape and stems that discus can't swim in between that. They're not like, you know, the scape wasn't designed around them. And so now these discus are actually forced in reality. Like it might see on paper it's a big tank, but in reality, those discus are actually forced between a very narrow sliver of space between the rock hardscape and the tank. You know, you're looking at like that much space. And so that's another thing you should be looking into, especially with diorama scapes. That's my fear with people getting really into them, is oftentimes they want to keep bigger fish. You know, your standard fish. And
Can you explain what a diorama scape is?
so it's the one with the forced perspective. It's the ones you see on sort of competition level. So it's a forced perspective, heavy, usually, but not always, like heavy hardscape. You know, your jungle, your valley. It doesn't necessarily have to. But yeah, it's they're creating that big illusion of
So it's
a much
a
larger
diorama is something that's like recreating not
It's a
just
scene, yeah.
a landscape, but more of a particular scene, like a
Yeah.
bridge over a stream. with a fallen log down. They're creating that entire
Exactly,
area.
the entire
Yeah.
thing, and done on a smaller scale, say 60 centimeter. One, the amount of space is greatly reduced, and so your fish choice is then reduced. But so yeah, going back to sort of, it's not fish first, but you have to consider the fish, and you have to critique. I would like to push for critiquing your tank, and critiquing doesn't mean it's bad. Like, you can be like, oh, this could be better. It doesn't make what you have as bad. Just like when you are critiquing the aesthetics of your tank, I think you should also critique, well, is it fit for purpose? What are some variables within the tank that are provided for those specific fish? Have I provided shelter for those fish? And shelter might be different for different fish. So, it could be, in the case of, say, hailstream loaches or a pleco, it could be crevices between the rocks, some sort of cave-like structure. Or for, say, danios, it might be stem plants or plants with gaps in between. For discus, it might be big branches. I think there's a guy, Aquascaping the World, who's got an amazing tank. And if you look at them in the wild, it's branches that they can go in between, not a big rock structure where that's essentially just useless space they can't use. And if you are going to create those sort of not useless spaces, you've got to have that excess room. You've got to be considering the excess space that you need to have. Other things like, I think I saw Green Aqua, they had an iwagumi, and they chucked in blue neon rasbora, which are a extremely soft water fish that come from quite shaded air, oftentimes black water, not necessarily, because you can have soft water with somewhat clear streams there. I've seen some videos and stuff. So I would describe that as unsuitable because, it's a minimalistic iwagumi, so there's no shelter, and it's very bright light. And so you're putting these fish under somewhat of stress.
Giving
so for
them
me,
the opposite of what they want.
Yeah, it looks aesthetic. It looks pretty. The fish were chosen based on their size and the fact they were blue. Not so much on, is this environment the best for these fish? Is it? My belief is aquascaping should enhance the standard of care for those fish, or the environment. It should be better than a empty tank with perfect water and low light. And in my opinion, that particular scape was worse than a bare bottom tank with low light and perfect water parameters, because one, I think it was a higher GH, KH, and super bright light, no areas for the fish to take any sort of shelter. It's just as bad or worse. So yeah, no, I believe in, and that's something I want to do with this hobby in New Zealand, is I feel as though overseas there's this very big gap. There's almost diverging between fish keeping and aquascaping. Like, I aquascape because I'm a fish keeper, and I want an environment that's stimulating for the fish and looks great. I think, every aquascaper is a fish keeper. Not every fish keeper is. I guess it goes both ways, but there's definitely your other aquascaping can be quite plant centric, like a lot of people, and so if you're only viewing it through that lens, they make certain decisions that maybe a fish keeper wouldn't, or they might not understand why a fish keeper is going to sacrifice maybe the health of the plants so that they can have a sand substrate, because they may not want aquasoil because they think sand gets the most out of their cories or their apistogramma, so they might say, well, why are you going to do that? Your plants are going to suck growing, but why wouldn't you want the fanciest plant on the market? Why wouldn't you want the most color? Some people are just happy with their crypts, and as long as it looks nice and gets the most out of their fish. Yeah,
it's a little bit of a loaded gun, but it's not at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a very clear, can be very clear distinctions, and it's almost like they're not merging together in the middle. Either it's one extreme, one to another, but not in the middle.
Like the sort of plant centric. But that's sort of what I want. That's what Ty Streetman said, and what I sort of believe in, what I want to do. Like, I set up the aquascaping group, like, not because I want to grow aquascaping per se. Like, it's actually because I want to up the standard of fish keeping in New Zealand. And I thought aquascaping was a great medium by which to do it, which is fun, which is going to get the most out of people's enjoyment. It's very much about the people actually loving your aquarium. And here are some tips on how to do it. I'm trying to provide an environment by which people can learn and share. And I think aquascaping is a great medium by which you can introduce certain ideas. But I'd rather not tell you. I'd rather so much show you or share the things that have formed my perspective. Because my beliefs or my ideas or how I do things it's only based on what I've seen, read, watched. And so my thought is, well, if I can provide a platform by which I can share the things that I've shared, read, watched, you'll arrive at the same sort of conclusion. So I don't have to tell you, do this because blah, blah, blah. Like, you go, oh, okay, I'm going to do this because I watched this thing and I read this thing. And I'm going to look at my aquarium slightly differently. And because, I don't know, I started off with, ornaments in a plastic aquarium. And, I'm not anti-ornaments. I'm not anti-plastic plants, but I'd rather go for the why live plants as opposed to why not plastic plants, which is another conversation we could have. But yeah, so that's why I started the aquascaping group, was because I wanted to up the fish keeping, the standard of fish keeping. I mean, imagine if everyone had aquascape tanks. And oftentimes when you say aquascape tanks, people have one perception of it. So it's the high tech ADA style. Whereas I think you've seen with the group is I've tried to really broaden it out. You'll see blackwater aquascapes and
nice
semi-biotope aquascapes. Like, even the biotope group can be a bit like, well, this sand isn't the correct sand and this plant isn't 100%, it can be just as bad sometimes. And I do regard biotope, especially at the competition level, as aquascaping.
As in itself, yeah.
It is, because just you are considering how it looks. Yeah, and it's especially at the competition level of biotope. So I've tried to incorporate all different styles and try not to be too one style. Even in the high tech, because there's a lot of content related to those sort of high tech styles. But so and also low tech, high tech, because a low tech tank can look just as good, if not better, than a high tech, depending on what plants you pick and what standards you set for yourself. And I
mean, the low tech, people assume that a low tech tank is a brown and green big leaf, the Amazon swords, and nothing much more than that, but it really isn't. I mean, you can generate some really, really vibrant scapes with basic equipment.
It's more so understanding what you can do and can't do, and what plants you can and can't use. I think the biggest thing I see is people are trying to build a Ferrari with bike parts when you could make a really good bike. You can't grow certain high-tech tanks, and there will be always people with like exceptions. Like, I can grow a Gosso parfait with no CO2 highlight, but for the majority of people, you're going to fail. And I think that's the big thing. A lot of even high-tech people are a bit like, trying to do a high-tech or look or style like a diet with the resources, but with not you don't have the resources to do it, but you could do this, and it could look amazing if you did it with this style. And so that's the other thing I try and get out. Important to me to show diversity in styles, is so that people are exposed to that. So when I started off, I only knew ADA style, the ADA, the green machine, aqua soil, plenty, CO2, that kind of thing. Whereas if I was to start off and I was to show people like what could be a good first aquascape that you could then build upon to work towards something else, is an epiphyte scape, wood, and Java for low light, because you don't want to, Anubias, and that could look like amazing. It really could. It could look professional as well. It could look like a professional scape, but you've chosen the style that caters to what you have and what you can afford. And rather than trying to do a diorama scape with 2 pieces of wood, no aquascore soil and no CO2, and it's going to be a disaster because you've chosen to highlight that you don't have CO2 and it's out of balance and you don't have enough plants. So I'd say disasters happen when you maybe underestimate what you can do, or trying something that you don't have the resources for.
Just back to the aquascaping group that you've created on Facebook. For those of you that don't know, in my mind, for lack of a better term, you're kind of a founding father of New Zealand aquascaping. Not in the sense of all the aquascapes you've done, but the way that you've promoted it and pushed it in a really gentle way. But it's gotten people interested in the conversations being there with it and coming with it, and your constant use of social media, regular posting and inspiration and getting people involved has been, in my mind, one of the bigger drivers to getting this to where we are currently in New Zealand.
Yeah.
You've kind of spoken about why you did that, but what was the massive picture behind that for you?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, the massive, yeah. Well, I have talked with that, and sometimes I'm a bit cynical, but so I say I wouldn't be able to do this without the likes of the Aquascape shop that taken huge steps for the hobby. Like I would say they are the founding, like they gave me the original base. The Aquascape shop definitely, they've definitely done a lot for the New Zealand hobby. Like they were one of the first. I think Rick Pullman, I think it's the same name. He had another group set up, and so they were already there. I came in with a plan, so I'm kind of a methodical person, and I was like, I want to make fish keeping better. Aquascaping is a great medium, so I'm going to set up a group. It was based on if I can get enough attention, I can then get a commercial attention, and if there's commercial attention, then that'll further incentivize the people, and it'll be a two-way street. So if I can generate attention, you're going to get financial investment or commercial interest. So they're going to bring in the sorts of products that I want. And then by having those products available, they're going to promote them. And then they're going to bring in more people. And so it's a two-way street. And so I wanted to capitalize on that. So when I first started, I do think, so there was the Aquascape shop already doing it. And then Aquahouse came in. And I believe Aquahouse, so talking to Remy, he said he'd originally, I think he was obviously aquascaping and stuff, but the commercial side of things and actually setting up that shop only came about because he saw interest in the group.
Yep. All right.
And that was my plan. So that was the plan, was I didn't expect Aquahouse, a separate store, to pop up, but I did hope that, the likes of the Fish Room, Hollywood Fish Farm would start stocking, Aquasoil, or bringing in products, because now you've got that demand. And then now that you've got those products, you're going to, you're not going to promote your plastic plants. You're going to promote your live plants because you've got all the stuff that you want to sell.
Yeah.
And so, it was about capitalizing on the commercial and like the people, getting people involved. And so that was sort of phase one. I wanted 3,000 members within 2 years. And I wanted, because that, you've got to have that interest. People see people. So if you see, there's 3,000 people part of this group, I want to join. I don't want to miss out.
Correct.
And then consistency. So unless you're paying like sponsoring for a post on Facebook, it's there and then it's gone. It's up there in the feed and you're competing with other groups and other things. So my strategy was consistency. So I'm going to post every day, maybe twice a day, 3 times a day. And it's by probability, it's going to end up in your feed. You are going to see it. And I'll join this group maybe once a month. At the start of each month is usually what I used to do on different groups. And so just by chance, throughout the year, you will see one of those posts and you will join. And and then you've got to provide value. I think if you continue to provide value to the world, you're going to get rewarded. And so the value I wanted to provide was, inspiration. I wanted to set up a bit of a library, like an online library of aquascapes. So initially on Facebook, you could add hashtags to things. I mean, you still can, but you could have hashtags, and then at the top of your group, you could organize them. So you could have ideas, biotope, African lakes, South America, and you could have these under hashtags, and then you could click on them at the top of the group, and then you just scroll through and you'd see all the different aquascapes under that header. A bit like I don't know, in a book, you'd look through and you go, oh, what are the topics? I'll go to this chapter. Yes, and I'd be able to see, and that was sort of my form of value I wanted to provide, was a place where people could easily access, videos of specific habitats or specific scape styles all in one place in New Zealand, because so that was the other form of value I wanted to provide. And then they got rid of the hashtag thing, and I was a bit sad. I was like, oh well, but you can still at the top search up like African lakes. At the top of the group, there's a little search bar. Search up African lakes, hashtag African lakes or something, and it'll come up with all the posts that I've done or other people have done under that hashtag. And you can see African cichlid aquascapes or footage of lakes. And that's the other thing I want to sort of not brainwash people, but but by providing a lot of content around natural, like videos of the Amazon, videos of Lake Tanganyika, you develop familiarity with aquatic habitats and an appreciation. So like, someone who hasn't maybe looked into like a rocky river or a swamp habitat, it's not going to appreciate my kind of tanks, these two tanks here, without having, looked into it. And if you see these videos, you may be more inclined to, I want to recreate that for my fish, or, oh, is that how my fish interacts in the environment? Oh, that Oscar, it covers the space of a swimming pool, and it's free swimming and it's outgoing, and oh wow, look at those discus that streaming across and back and forth, and they're in the thing, and they're not just stationary huddled in this corner. So yeah, that's the other thing. Maybe if more people saw these natural habitats, one, they'd care, but also just like, you might want to create an environment in your own aquarium without me having to say, do this. You're just inspired or, being manipulated into doing it. If you're being cynical.
Helen mentioned just a little bit earlier, I'll just bring it up. One of the best things about you is that you're very encouraging regardless of where people are starting from, which I totally agree with. Just sort of lurking in the background of multiple different Facebook pages. It's very much a part of the ideology of your group is encouraging people, giving it a go, as opposed to throwing down the hammer and saying you're doing this wrong sort of scenario, which I think is also aiding and helping. Yeah,
it's not so much where you start, but the fact that you've started.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also getting people to start as opposed to where you start. Because like once you've started, there's a 6-year timeline where you go from here to like there. But provided you started, like
you're away.
Imagine in 6 years how good you'll be, or how many plants you'll have, because one of the things as well is like with each scape you have more plants to work with, so that's how they get better. But it's also how can you elicit positive behavior? Like what's the thing I had conversations with people, it's like, is what you've said the most effective way of getting people to do what you want? I mean, you could call it empowering, you could call it manipulating, however cynical you want to be. But it's more like, is hating on someone's aquascape going to want them to be better? What is your motivation? Like, and if it doesn't align with me, then you're out. Sort of with my group, it's about creating a positive environment. It's to encourage them to be better. It's to provide a platform for them to, to get better, to look after the fish better, to, 9 out of 10 times laughing or hating on someone's first attempt at aquascaping isn't going to motivate them or elicit the kind of growth behavior. They're more inclined to quit or just like, these aquascaping people suck. Like, they're just a bunch of elitists who don't like keeping, there is that perception. And that is something that you see in a lot of groups, and that's something that you kind of have to battle with. And so is what you're saying and doing the most effective way to get that other person to do what you want? And there's a form of manipulation, but I think what matters is what's your end goal.
A positive one. It's is what you want them to do something positive? Like, is it, or do you just, so it's a bit of not emotional intelligence, but just sort of social dynamics. Like, it would make no sense for me to start hating on people's first aquascape, even if I think it is not as great. And there is an art to critique as well, or getting people to improve. You compliment them on one thing, and you provide suggestions. I think that's another thing, is people can be a bit not autistic, but it's, you have to do this. No one likes to be told to do something, or people want options. And so it always has to be provided as a suggestion, as opposed to as like a you must, unless they've directly asked for it. You suggest, and you got to keep in mind, if you're plant centric, fish centric, or budget as well. Give them, like some people, their only solution is spending $500. That's not what people want to do. And so I think having with me is I have quite a broad perspective in terms of styles and budgets, and I want to give people what I didn't have, which is options, styles that you can do on a limited budget or on a low tech setup, but also pushing for, like, as I already said, like, don't try setting expectations, realistic expectations. So if you are going for the high tech thing or style with 2 rocks and 1 plant, it's probably going to fail. So prepare yourself for disappointment. And not everyone has different personalities and how they approach the world. So failure for me is just like, okay, I'm going to go again. I enjoy this. Whereas some people, of course, they fail and it's the end of the world. They want to quit. So it is important to provide that kind of encouragement.
Yeah.
Because for me, I think,
as a community, if we're not lifting each other up and supporting each other, then we can't really call ourselves a community.
And it's also important, because I do get criticisms. Like, I do understand, like, you don't want to blindly support someone doing something wrong.
No.
Or like, you don't want to, like, yes, I love your, I don't know, disaster
swamp.
Or the fish that's like in a tiny aquarium, but there are ways of, you've done this great, but try this, or here's something you could do. There's an art to it, and especially through a online medium, like social media, you can't pick up tone of voice. So sarcasm is a killer. It really is. Sometimes I cringe reading things. I'm like, oh no. Or like, you've really got to think about, like, have a bit of smartness with what you say and how you say it, because someone might read it as in a certain tone of voice, but what you've said it in another tone. So in person, and so you see these fights breaking out. And it's like, oh no. Just based on tone of voice not being, because some people can be quite a sarcastic personality. You can't pick that up on
so hard to pick up that on.
And sometimes you think it is and it isn't, and you've got to have a certain type of smartness about you with this sort of thing, and it's just the most painful thing to see. And I try to keep out of it. I'm like, my moderators do this. I try, and those sort of social things, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with fights, but I will, I'll try to address it. It's not, I expect my moderators to do that sort of thing for me.
Sometimes moderators get it wrong as well, though. I've found that in my group. Sometimes you've got to moderate the moderators.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. Sometimes, there's a learning process. Yeah, because everyone has their ideas of how the hobby should be run, but ultimately, I want it run a certain way. So, you can agree or disagree, but I think we're already on track. I've already achieved the first stage of what I want to achieve, if not more. I think the New Zealand hobby, within the years of which I started the Aquascaping group, has taken off. I mean, we have tissue culture plants, 5 or 6 aquasoil brands we can choose from, all sorts of things. Just interest, more people doing it. And my philosophy is, if I could inspire one person to get started or have a go, then I can do it with thousands. That person will go on to, hey, look at this, why don't you try this? So it's a domino effect. You just have to start. You just have to try and make a positive influence and trust that will continue. You do a good deed and someone then feels motivated to do something good for other people.
Yeah.
You've just kind of touched on the next question I was about to ask, is how do you feel about the growth that's happened in the aquascaping hobby over the last couple of years? You think we're going in the right direction or stagnating a bit now?
I feel vindicated because I had a lot of people say like you couldn't be done, but I I think it's going in a decent direction. In terms of stagnation, it's somewhat expected. So in terms of numbers, like growth of numbers, like we're at 4,000 members now, but I had a 3-year plan, so it was very much based on growth, and then it was gonna decay. It was gonna level off because there's only so many people. And so then the next stage is just, once you get people started, it's that 6-year mark. So 6 years on from people when they started, now you've got a bunch of people who are aquascaping at a high level, who then take on the role of me, feel motivated to motivate other people, to post content. That's the other thing I want to, I kind of want to step away from the group to an extent. It was the plan, 3 years, and then find other people who share the same views, vision, who are going to do what I do, a group of people who are going to post every day and motivate other people. And that comes with a lot of time. So I think we're still very much in that growth, get people to join, experiment. People are only in their first to second year, so you're still like learning, buying stuff, making mistakes. I mean, you're always going to do that, but I'd say we're tracking in a good direction. But aquascaping naturally lends itself to being plant-centric and having those sorts of views, and which is not a problem. Like, I like plants, but that's a passive process. And so ensuring that people are considering the fish aspect as an active process that you can continually have to put energy into. And it can start by just posting about how you've done your aquarium and what are the variables that you've considered. Like, I set up an aquascape a while back, and I had a big piece of wood, blah, blah, blah. And I had this little piece of wood with, it was a little hollow. And I was like, I'm going to add this to the aquascape because I'm going to provide depth, but also the hollow is going to provide a home for some coolie loaches. And so I put it at the back to provide depth to the aquascape, make it look deeper, but it also was a home for the coolie loaches. And it was incredibly rewarding to see them actually using it, having the idea of like, oh, this is going to be a great habitat or your micro habitat for this particular fish. And it's also serving a purpose of making the tank look better. It's and, not or, in a lot of cases. I'm going to do this because it's going to make the tank look better, and it serves a purpose for the fish. It doesn't have to be or. I mean, and myself, I have different styles of aquascaping because I keep different sorts of fish. I have a rocky aquascape because I found in the 8 years of keeping my one, I've had him in different aquascapes. He gravitated towards round rocks and sand, and that's how I got to see the most of them. Was on this round. I put a round rock in once, and he just was all over it. And I saw that, and I was like, "Wow, I can get the most out of my fish." And because they're quite shy. You don't really see them.
Mm.
And it was only when I started adding variables that bring the most out of these fish that I think you truly begin to appreciate them. So I would say it's tracking where I think it should be. It's doing exactly what I thought it would.
You've mentioned numbers a couple of times. 6 years has come up more than once. Are you tracking some of your own metrics for where you want things to be? And what's the next stage for you, for your group, and for the concept of aquascaping in New Zealand?
Yeah, so you set metrics because you want some sort of goal, and also because I understood that it's a numbers game on social media to an extent. So first year 2,000, third year I wanted we're in the third year, so I wanted at least 3,000. We're at 4,000, and that's just purely based on I wanted a decent percentage of the New Zealand hobby, because then you have a bit more influence and stuff. And so I do track metrics to an extent. I do track things like I don't know why, but I don't know, it just appealed to me. Like, when are the best times to post certain things, or what times and what days are most popular? And I do experiment all the time. Like, I used to schedule posts quite a bit. I still do from time to time. And so Facebook allows you to schedule, like, I think 3 months in advance or 2 months is about the limit they do. And so I'd schedule out maybe every second day a post at this particular time, and I would experiment. I still do experiment with certain times, what kinds of posts attract the most sort of interaction. For the most part, the most popular, the posts that receive the highest level of interaction are posts done by New Zealand hobbyists themselves. So it's a photo of their own tank because it's relatable. You're gonna see if me posting an international scape or some scape I found online to inspire you guys isn't going to be as, I don't know, it doesn't receive that same sort of interaction because it's not as relatable. It doesn't feel as real. Yeah. Whereas if Helen posts her tank, it's, wow, wait, you did this, and it feels real, and you can do that as well. And
I can get all these plants, and I can get all these things, and I might be able to walk or knock on your door and see this tank as well.
So I do track things like I will have a look into, I don't know, maybe a bit of a nerd in that perspective. I do like looking at metrics like growth and what things, attention. I think it's important, or even I'd look at the pie chart that says ratio of males to females or something. It's about 50-50, which is what I'd like to see. Like, I don't want to see any gender dominated. It's quite good to see that it's somewhat 50-50. It's maybe leaning slightly more to the males, which is what you'd expect. But because I think it's also important to have a platform where women feel comfortable as well. It's not just an only boys club, which is sometimes what a lot of people feel.
It's very much considered a all boys club hobby. Metrically, via my Facebook page, we have more females on the Fisherman Facebook page than we do males. It's not far off 50-50, but there is more females that have liked and followed the Fisherman than males. So instantly that just wipes out that it's the old boys club, because it's not. Fish keeping can be anybody. It's all inclusive. Anyone can keep a fish.
And even the range. I'll look at age ranges as well. It's quite broad. I mean, obviously, fish keeping is usually an older person's thing, just because of costs and stuff. But so I look at all those things. There are certain metrics you can't track. Like, you don't have a number for how many people feel inspired and how many people are really doing this, but you can kind of get a good sense of it. Like, there's certain sort of goals, like how people look at fish keeping. There are certain things you can't put metrics on. But I sort of think a lot of the things that I have in place are sort of capitalizing on human behavior. It's often based on the assumption that this stimulus made me do certain things. Like, me watching this video made me realize, that's a different way of looking at things. And so it's oftentimes based on the assumption of, well, it worked for these people and it worked for me. So if I provide this kind of content, it's going to elicit this sort of way perspective or way of looking at things, which is what I want. But yeah, you can't. It's hard to track those sorts of things. But there's enough people. For me, it's more like, well, I've got 3 people that I know have made that switch, and that's enough for me. You know, because if there's 3 people, there's by an extension going to be others out there. And it's also just, I think people enjoy their aquariums more. They're excited. They're because an ornament tank with sort of gravel and plastic plants is very static. Quite after a while, it does get boring. It's static. There's nothing changing besides the fish. And this is another thing I want to address is you don't get any sort of dopamine kicks or excitement from that. The only thing you get from is when you add more fish. So oftentimes what you see, and this is what I did as a beginner, is you only have 1 tank. You know, the option of getting another tank is not really feasible. So you keep adding fish because you get that little dopamine kick whenever you go to the store. You get, that little yes. And so then you end up with these overstocked tanks because that's your only source of sort of like dopamine, you know. It's like, yes, another fish. And so I feel as though these sorts of aquascape tanks or, you know, natural scape tanks are not static. They're evolving. They provide an alternative pathway to get that sort of dopamine rush that you get from just
because
adding
the whole
fish.
aquarium's changing, not just the fish.
Yes.
Everything's evolving.
And it's taking that holistic approach and seeing an aquarium as a little ecosystem. And even as a child, I used to think of an aquarium as this little underwater city. And that's what I wanted to recreate. And in some ways that hasn't changed. How I do it has changed, but the overall idea of it's this grand city, and you know, the aquarium is not the fish's home, but rather its entire world, and the space and the little niche sort of habitats within that aquarium is the home of the fish, sort of thing. Like it's so you're providing this entire world, and even the way I look at space in aquarium has changed. And that's why I'm a bit like, you shouldn't hate on people or like be too hard on critiquing, because like how I look at aquariums has just changed so much. It's evolved, and you should allow people to evolve into that. And that's often just done naturally by looking at the things I've looked at. And I've got a post scheduled at some point where it addresses sort of the sort of a thinking exercise based on like scale. And the basic concept was you have 4 identical rectangles, and you draw 2 identical fish, one in the first 2. So you have 1 fish, another fish in the other one. And then the third box, you have a big fish. And then in the 4th one, it's really small. And the idea being that there's this weird sort of paradoxical thing you see in the hobby where as your fish get bigger, the aquariums get smaller relative to the size of the fish.
Yep.
And it's that idea of scale. And it's something that I didn't really think about, but then I think aquascaping lends itself to that because it's perspective, and you don't want a big. And so that's another idea that I want to introduce. And just back to front. So aquariums like scale, they often like go so wide lengthwise. But they don't often scale at the same rate as like your front to back. Tanks can be quite narrow. So when people get longer tanks, they often get bigger fish. And that's when you end up with sort of fish that are half the length of your back to front thing. So you have arowana like a turning space of their body, and that's something I still do. I mean, I'll look at my tanks and be like, I could get smaller fish. Or that's why I tend to go nano. Only because my tanks aren't huge, and I can provide a higher level of, I don't care, or I'm at a higher level with smaller fish. It's easier, and just because our tanks scale, that front to back.
Yeah, so I totally understand that concept. I've got a fairly large tank behind us, which you can't see. It's really long. It's like 2.3 or 2.2 long. It's really high. It's 700-ish high. So it looks really, really imposing and massive, but it's only 500 or 550 wide. And the amount of people that have said to me, "Oh, chuck an arowana in there, it's perfect," but you don't see the width of it. And an arowana is going to outgrow that in a matter of months. It's just it doesn't have what it needs, and because we're seeing this 2D face on us of this looks massive, but the reality is there's the other element that just doesn't get considered often.
It's something that I look back on. I'm like, oh, if I would do that differently, and I don't hate on. Like, you shouldn't. It's not something a lot of people even see, and it's just one of those things that you kind of just pick up on, and so oftentimes now I'm sort of basing my stocking off that dimension as opposed to the length.
Yeah, but a footprint is something that's just not considered or not really talked about very often. Water volume, how many liters, but how long and how wide are we playing with here? To what we're kind of looking for, and height plays a part for some fish, but we're looking for the length and the width to make the majority for what we can work with.
And that's where I think the aquascaping, that I got those ideas maybe through aquascaping a wee bit, because I'm looking at those habitats. I'm looking at space differently. Your back to front dimension is very important in aquascaping because it gives you that illusion of depth. And these competition aquascapes tend to have a longer dimension back to front. You're actually looking at like some of these custom like tanks, like 60, 70 centimeters front to back.
Yeah.
Whereas like a lot of the tanks you buy from a store, like at most like 50, I think my Aqua one is 55 centimeters.
This one's 60 centimeters from front to back.
Amazing. Yeah, and so through aquascaping, that's favored.
Cool.
And
I think a lot of the traditional tanks are around about that 45 centimeter depth that we can
which
get.
is quite narrow. And from an aquascaping point of view, like you can create average aquascaping and it can look absolutely amazing if your tank is like dimensions are quite deep, like back to front. Like I'll see some tank like, wow, Helen's got 60 centimeter. I think that's 45, 50 centimeters back to front. And that just looks by itself, even if you didn't fill it up, it just looks impressive because you just get that depth.
Yeah.
And so
this tank's actually called the Aquascaper 600.
Oh, yeah.
It was designed by George Farmer, so it's specifically for aquascaping. It's not deep, but it's like it's.
But by extension, I think that fish prefer that as well.
They do,
They're not crammed between this narrow thing between. I think you've got to break the illusion of what your aquarium actually is. It's a glass box, and you've combined them between. The wider this gets, I think the better it is. And
I've just recently had a very similar conversation with Braxton. Actually, I've got a stand in my sales floor that's 900 long. It's about 500 deep, I think it is from memory. And I was just going to chuck a Blue Planet 150 on there, but that still left me with like 15 centimeters of depth that isn't going to be used. And one of the Vivaquariums are about 2 centimeters under that gap, so it becomes 900 by 500 or something like that, or 550. And so the extra width will open up so many more options for plants, rocks, woods, fish, the whole lot, that it's just worth doing that, going for the slightly larger, wider one, and then playing with that way for that reason.
Makes it so much easier. And that's something, if I could customize, if I could get more tanks in New Zealand, I could have a bit more input on dimensions. That's the one thing, just to get that back to front bigger than like 45 centimeters. Like scaping is something like those extra 10 centimeters, 20, it's huge. Like what you can do and fish you can keep better, scaling.
It allows you to build up from a further distance as well, so you don't have up like that. You can have it more of a smoother incline.
It's a lot easier to scape in. And if like I wanted to create so one of my latest ones is in the 120, and I wanted to use Echinodorus, so your Amazon sword kind of things. That's quite a big plant, and it's often not used in aquascaping just because it gets so big and it's hard to use. But I wanted to do this scape actually funnily enough, not on the fish so much, but centered around this plant, because I like the way fish interact with it. So I picked it's based on the plant, and I found it quite difficult using it because 55 centimeters is still longer than deep, back to front depth. Is it deeper or width or wider than most people's? But it's been quite a challenge to work with. And if I could have picked a tank, like if I could have chosen the dimensions. I add another 20 centimeters back to front.
Is that a standard Amazon sword, the Amazonius, I think they called, or is it a different variety that you're looking at using?
Oh yeah, no. So I just say Amazon sword because that's like what most people sort of know. But it's a different variety. It's not the Amazonicus, that standard one. It's the So I believe I have 2 or 3 Hormani or Osiris.
Yeah,
it's actually quite tricky, like trying to figure out what you actually have.
Yeah,
because often, or like even if there is a difference, like between the different types. I know I've got a big red one, 3
The red
big
ones
red.
are nice. Flame.
Yeah.
Hormani have a thinner leaf structure, a thinner, longer one with the red through it. Barthai and Osiris are fairly difficult. From memory, if you touch the back of the leaf of the Barthai, it's got a lot more texture behind it compared to the Osiris when it's grown submersed. But they have very, very similar leaf structures. But yeah, the back of it's got a bit more texture to it. Those are tricky.
So I took inspiration from the Echinodorus Paradise, the 2 tanks ADA did, and I wanted to use Echinodorus and Holanthium because that used to be an Echinodorus. So I got all these different, I think 4 or 5 different species, because I also have the little Parva Floris, the little tiny swords that only grow like this big. I've got a mystery one that's also big from someone. And I also have some, the big ones. I got I still have 2. I still have a Uruguayensis, so that's a really tall, skinny one. I sold 2 of the big ones that I had, but I still have some smaller ones.
I'm a fan of that plant.
Yeah, no, so I have those. I just wanted to collect them. I wanted to show them off because they're not a sword. The sword used to be really popular, I think.
Didn't it just?
Early days. And then it sort of died. Because everyone likes diorama, and a big sword plant isn't gonna.
Yeah, gone of the days of like the jungle type planted tank where you put a whole bunch of big plants in, and it's more structured. And big, with that, as the swords have kind of diminished, probably doesn't help that they grow so massive. And I think that fish tank sizes are getting a little bit smaller, but they get so big. But yeah, the style that people grow their planted tanks are now different, and then it's sort of taken away from the sword plants, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I wanted to, because I bought a sword plant from someone, and online it looked a lot smaller than I thought. This would have been a couple of years ago. I bought it and it was huge, like massive. Like it was probably more than 45 centimeters, like in circumference. Like it was
a proper mother plant.
It was. It was huge, and I just fell in love with it. Hot. Probably hot. It was massive, like in height, and just it was a big spherical thing.
Because we've got the horizontalis here, which grows really low but really wide, which is quite a cool plant.
Yeah, so I have a suspicion. I think it was sold under Osiris, but I do suspect a lot of these swords that we have here are hybridized, especially in Christchurch, because there were people who used to do that. Because I've bought other Osiris or ones that claim to be in it. They've never grown like this one. I still have pictures of it. It was beautiful. I still have it, but it's just tiny because I chopped it back and it still hasn't really recovered. But it was beautiful. I had these green leaves. I like green. I'm not a big red. I like a little bit of red. So in my tank, I'm a bit frustrated because my swords are quite red, but I wanted a lighter, like bright green. I also have the Marthai, the major sword.
Have you still got the Marthai? Easily my favorite green sword.
Yeah, so that I like that because it has a nice look to it. I've got 4 of them, I think.
Yeah,
4 or 5. From this one fella. And swords. I bought this one because I like the way the Danio swam in between it and how fish shelter under the leaves, because there's gaps between the leaves for small fish to be able to swim in and out of. And I'd seen videos by like McColgy. There's a really good channel that I recommend everyone watch. It's called Below Water.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'd seen some of those videos where he's like in this Rio Sakuri or Rio Prata, and it's this clear water with these swords, and the fish are like swimming in and out of it, and the little tetras take shelter, and they almost like an anemone. They sort of like in and out. And that's what I wanted to recreate. I wanted to use a plant that I hadn't seen very often, used hardscape that I collected or I'd bought off someone from a local beach. I think my big piece I bought off someone, it was a gift, I think, that was collected from a local beach. So use strong but like very simple hardscape, because you kind of have to do that if you're using swords. Like you can't have something you've got to have space for the plants. Something that would highlight these plants and show how fish interact with them and that sort of thing.
So it's not just upward space; it's also downward space as well.
100%,
right?
And they shade out a lot of plants, so you have to consider that as well.
Yeah.
And you do have to be a bit brutal, like with the trimming. So I recently trimmed a sword, and it was painful because I don't like cutting healthy leaves. I don't like doing that sort of thing. So yeah, I completely hacked back the sword to give more room for the other plants because they'd sort of been shaded out. And I've become quite a collector of this. Yeah, because I've got a Halanthemum carpet as well. I've got all 3 types, I guess, all the types that you can get in New Zealand, from the tissue cultures to the ones we had originally. And yeah, I've got a lot of the swords we can get in New Zealand. I don't have the horizontalis. I was gifted one a while back, but I felt that would probably shade out too much, take too much space. I mean, it's a some people consider it a big tank, but you've only got so much space. And it'd be awesome to see in your store if you had a big tank with swords and a big jungle style. So I wanted to do a structured jungle. So I think you've seen some pictures. It's getting there, but I want something that's a jungle, but it still has a focal point. It still has a bit of structure to it.
Yeah. Well, the large tank that I picked up a couple months back, the plan for that is to do a rainforest jungle type of vibe with showcasing swords, because I think that size tank will allow them to get their full potential of size. So I don't know when that's going to happen one day, but not today, that's for sure. But that's kind of the plan, because I think swords have kind of been the forgotten family of plants here in New Zealand.
And it's a tricky plant to work with. I mean, they're pretty undemanding, but in terms of just size, they can be a bit of a pain. And
not that I'm an aquascaping expert by any stretch of the imagination, but they can be quite tricky to work with in a scape as well, because they're harder to shape and to adjust with too. So.
Yeah, and in my case, the color, I was hoping for more greens. I still have the original, so that kind of thing. But I also, because I picked the plant, then I centered around tetras. So I wanted tetras. I wanted a tank that showcased the blue emperor tetra.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, the name should be changed to like purple.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are a stunning purple color, and I 100% recommend it to. Not everyone, but I recommend them because they're little piranhas. I don't know if you ever put your hand in, and you can actually feel. Helen said the same. You can feel them pecking at you. They're really going. Some of them really go for you, like bite you. And they can be a bit territorial. I find the males definitely more so between each other than other fish.
Sparring a bit, eh?
And I find that with most shoaling fish, they actually hate each other. They only come together when they absolutely have to. Like I find my neon tetras. So I bought some neon tetras because I was like, for the nostalgia, and they're cheap. And I just found, I was like, I don't recall ever seeing this. They hate each other. They really they'll stay as far apart from each other as possible, unless I'm doing a water change or I'm up there feeding or I'm watching or something. They'll constantly be fighting each other, constantly sparring. And I found that with most shoaling fish, like I had pea puffers.
The difference is the amount of damage that they can do for their size compared to a couple of big Oscars that are sparring with each other,
100%.
can rip each other's face off. A couple of little tetras can't do that same damage, so it's not as
exactly. And for the most part, like you oftentimes have a lot more space as well for these fish to spread out. And I do wonder with the neon tetras, because in the past I found they always had like bite marks. And then these bite marks would get infected with some sort of fungal thing. and then I'd just slowly lose them. I do wonder if it was just like they were just fighting and getting infected. And just recently, I was like, oh, I wonder if that was maybe why that was the case. Yeah, because
we just recently got in, just back to your emperor tetras. We got black emperors in the other day.
Oh, wow.
Have you seen or had them before?
I have not. Is that the Kerai? No, the Palmeri, right?
Palmer, I believe, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it was the Kerai and the Palmeri, and they're the bigger ones, right?
Yeah. Just almost jet black with this iridescent eye. They are spectacular. Like, first time I've ever seen them in person, I opened up the box, opened up the bag, I was like, wow, they're pretty cool. Put them in a tank the next day, I was like, wow, absolutely mesmerized by them. They are a really, really cool fish.
Yeah, and I find emperor tetras to be quite easy to spawn as well. I mean, I've got a couple babies just in the main display tank, just popping up. They don't seem to go. The neon tetras I've seen, all the fish in the tank I've seen spawn, the reed tetras, the emperors, the neons. But I found the neons really eat eggs. Well, I've seen them go along the bottom eating the eggs, whereas the emperors don't seem to go after fry. Because I've got some, I accidentally bred some ember tetras.
Mm-hmm.
By pure, I was breaking down a tank. I actually sold the ember, or gave them away. Sold them, got rid of the ember tetras. But I had this tank just sitting on the ground with all my like spare plants from the scape, and I left it there for like a month. Came back to finally get around to cleaning it up, and noticed there was like 10 ember tetras, like fry. And so I added 2 weeks ago. I completely forgot about them. And they're still alive. I see them out with the rest of the tetras. So, and I've still got another 5 or 6 ember tetras to add. Nice. Just by pure accident. Accidentally bred them. So, yeah. Cool. Great stuff.
Now we're talking about fish. Shall we talk about hillstream loaches?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Well, it's always funny because when non-fish people ask me about like, oh, what fish do you have? I'm like, oh, I got some small little wriggly fish. I always downplayed the knowledge. But I just felt it was a gift. So my first one was a Gastromyzontidae. So something that I didn't know originally was in New Zealand, they come under Gastromyzontidae. They come under one name. And I don't know if I want to say this because, MPI, blah, 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 they're not that smart. But they come under one name that's no longer relevant. Like, it's been split up into further species. Like, I got to recall, but I don't know if Gastromyzontidae actually exists as a species as such. It might do, I can't remember. But it was split up into 2 or 3 others. And then you have other sort of groups within the Gastromyzon genus. So in New Zealand, they come in as assorted bags, really. And you can have, I think there's something like 36 plus different species.
Wow.
And I've seen a good 10 in New Zealand. And some you only see once. So I saw this giant one that was about like that big.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen it once, and it was in a Papua Nui animate. And I'm so gutted I didn't buy it. But I didn't buy it because I'm like, well, it doesn't fit with the rest of them. But it was huge, massive, biggest, and I've never seen it again. And then you have my favorites are the Viriosus, so Gastromyzon viriosus, and that is yellow. It has a yellow tail.
So I've seen them, yeah.
And a yellow tail. And then you have the 2 most common ones in New Zealand. These have blue tails, so it's the Cenocephalus. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how I'm going to say it. Cenocephalus, because they have real complicated names. All these Latin names, I feel like people think, oh, you're just saying them because you want to be like some pompous, know-it-all. But it's really because you don't have any other choice.
Yeah. That's the only way to differentiate them sometimes.
There's the one with the spots, or the ones with the lines, or the ones that the spots stop just after that point.
Yeah, and even with plant names, like sometimes there's just no real common name. Like the common name is the Latin name. But anyway, so the 2 most common ones are the ones with the spots, the black ones, the spotty ones. And so that's Cenocephalus, and they have a blue tail. And the way you can tell is they've got an unbroken lines on the tail when they extend. And then the Skittulus, the other one with the blue tail. So I've got quite a few. I'll see if I can just...
How cute.
Yeah. Yeah, so I myself have 4 species. So I've got the Zebranus that's got stripes on them, and the original 8-year-old ones are Stellatus, and I haven't managed to find any more of his species really. I'm sure there's people out there with them, but I'm a bit gutted because I really wanted to get more of his own sort of kind, I guess. I mean, they're quite a social in a way. Like they're not dependent on each other in the same way a tetra might be. They don't shoal, but you find it's quite fun watching them all fight. They'll fight over a rock, and they often get confused. So in New Zealand, I prefer not to say hillstream loach because oftentimes people confuse them with Sowellia, which is one that I don't know if we can get that in New Zealand.
Is that the Hong Kong pleck?
Yeah, the Hong Kong hillstream, and that's what most overseas when you say hillstream loach, that's what most people refer to. And those are a lot easier to breed because you don't get them in assorted bags. So that's the other challenge with these guys is the breeding. It's because one, you're not getting all the same species a lot of the time.
Yeah.
2, you don't often get them at like you'd be surprised how big they get. Like they're not plecos, they're not huge, but they do get bigger than what most stores get them in as. And they take years to grow to that size. They're actually not incredibly fast growing. So not only do you have the issue of multiple species not getting them mature enough, I saw in some forums, in order to get them to spawn, you often have to do a cold water change. But prior to that, you have to raise the level to about like 28 degrees was what they said. A lot of people said they raised, but at those temperatures, they also die.
Right.
Extended, so it's a bit of it can be a bit risky.
Yeah.
And they are open water spawners, so there's videos. I've got a little Gastromyzon group as well. I think someone added me as admin, but they'll go up together in mid water and they'll just release their eggs. So they do this little dance and they release their eggs.
Really?
Yeah. So they're scatter spawners and the eggs go everywhere.
Just based on their behavior, I would have thought they would have found like a wee crevice and loaded them into that and then disappeared or something. Wow.
That's what a lot of people think. And honestly, I don't think that's wrong because there are so many different species that to make a huge generalization over all of them would be probably wouldn't be right. Like I'm sure that might happen. But from the videos I've seen of my particular ones, Gastromyzon, Skittles, they do go up and they're spawn mid-water. And in some ways it makes sense because if you have a torrent of water and all these crevices of rocks, those eggs are going to get blown everywhere, so dispersed, and then they're probably going to find their way into these crevices and rocks.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did with my aquarium. I had these areas in the back where it's just sort of medium-sized rocks, so there's plenty of gaps, in the hopes that if they were to lay eggs, the eggs would just fall between there. So I don't think they predate on their young intentionally. Like I think it would just sort of be a sucking along. One issue with that though is food does get trapped there, so it means I have to do a bit more maintenance. There's a bit of a flaw in the design.
Have you noticed any behavioural differences between the different species of them? Or they're very similar?
I don't know if I can make that call. I do notice differences between, like, my original one is still very shy. Like 8 years on, he's not coming up. Like I've gotten used to sneaking up on the tank and not going too quick and observing them. And whereas these ones that I bought more recently, within like sort of 2 years, are more outgoing. Like you probably can't see them from this angle, but they're right up to the glass. They're pretty outgoing. So I don't know if I can make that call because I don't think I've had enough of one species to be able to just be like, oh, well, that one's different. I mean, they like round rocks. They like to scuttle about. The one difference I will say is my original one, the Stellatus, is a bit of a chameleon, and that it can change its colors quite much more dramatically than the black spotty ones. So it will. I had it in a pisto tank as well once. So they're quite a It got quite a tolerance. And when it went onto the white sand, it would turn completely white. So you could almost not see it. It had blended in. And then when it moved on to the black rock, it went black.
Huh.
So that would be the difference. The other ones don't seem to blend in, or they're not as good at that.
Yeah.
Or they just don't tend to.
I like the way you use the word scuttle, because I think that really describes the way that they move. They scuttle about.
Or wiggle. They scuttle and wiggle about, and that's why I love them. That's why I think they're one of my favorite fish among, along with the pistos. Because just the way they sort of scuttle about, and when they swim, they can swim midwater, but it doesn't look as natural to them. They more so shuffle, and just watching them fight as well. So they'll compete for territory by trying to bum shuffle the other one off the rock.
Yeah, I've seen plecos do that. That's funny.
Yeah, like vigorous bum shuffling to try and shove the other one. They're competing.
Like two brothers on a couch.
Yeah. They're competing for the last chair in. What's that game you play in parties?
Musical chairs.
Musical chairs, and the males in particular, not the males, I don't know, the ones with the blue tails will flare out, and you see that lovely blue tail, and and one will often turn white, so you'll get one turn white. This is the only time the black spotty ones seem to change color, is when they're sparring. One will turn white, the other one will be black. And I don't know why, but it must be some sort of, I don't know if it's a mating ritual or if it's more so just like dominance.
Dominance, yeah.
Yeah. I've just found
Are you able to tell the difference between male and females?
To an extent, yeah. You can tell more so when they come up to the glass. When you see them up against the glass, the males are much like sort of narrower in that sort of pelvic-y region, whereas females tend to be much broader. But then it can be quite tricky, because that's often under the assumption that like you have two that are of the same maturity, and one's not much younger.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can tell. I got into them because I watched a video. It's Rachel O'Leary. And she did
I know Rachel.
BC spotlight on them, and she breaks it down quite well, actually. I'd recommend people watch her video. But yeah, no, I've just grown to love them. They can be quite shy. I wouldn't, and I don't think they're suitable for a lot of community tanks. Like, you just got to be a bit careful, just more so that they can be out competed for food. Like, if you have them in with a pleco, they might go hungry. I know a lot of people don't have much luck with them. I found them to be very hardy, but that's often because I'm putting them in tanks where there's not that many fish.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, are you keeping them with anything else, or anything else you think could be okay to keep them with?
I mean, I've kept my one with like a pisto pair. I probably wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that just because I was keeping them probably a higher temp than I would have wanted to in the first sort of 3 years. And that was the only other fish in the 200-liter tank. So he had a lot of space. You could keep them with tetras, keep them with a bunch of things. It's more so just making sure that they can get food. They're not in with fish that are obviously going to eat them or attack them.
Yeah.
So you can't have any other fish that are going to out-compete them. And because they're shy, you often have to place your food and then walk away and then try and sneak up on the aquarium. In this tank, I find with numbers, they're a lot more emboldened. I feed them Rapashi Soylent Green. Yeah. Sometimes I'll feed some other wafers. They'll eat a lot of things. I'll even eat Daphnia. If the Daphnia sink to the bottom, they'll definitely munch Daphnia. Anything that they can get to, flake. Yeah. But I think it's probably safer Rapashi would probably be my staple.
I feed brine shrimp I've got a tank of them as well. And I just pipe them around. So I'm thinking most of the time I just squirt some brine shrimp in there. Obviously, eventually the brine shrimp sticks to the ground and they go for it in those little pockets. They're good to go on that. So
and that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
That's how I've been told you should condition them. Start feeding them like brine shrimp with some higher protein diet to try and condition them to lay eggs. I've even fed them white worms. Once that hits the bottom, they'll go for that. Yeah. So as long as they can get their little sucker on them, they'll eat it. I don't know what I think better food would be more sort of algae plant-based. I found I ran into issues. I was overfeeding them to an extent. I was feeding almost like every day. I just cut that right back to maybe once or twice a week, especially since
Really?
Rapashi can be quite a messy food.
Yeah.
And with all the crevices, I found it was probably just the tank was kind of stinking a wee bit when I did water change. I was like, this is not, I got to change this. So I've definitely cut back on the feeding a huge amount. And that's also because I calibrated this tank to grow algae. So I usually set the tanks up like 2 or 3 weeks before I even put fish in, just to get an idea of how the sort of ecosystem runs. And so I set it up so it was growing a bit of algae, which is not really what you want to do with a planted tank.
How did you do that though?
How did
because that's something I've tried to do in the past for various projects, and I've never actually managed to do it in a way that isn't overwhelming.
Well, it was initially. I think it was somewhat like, I wish I still have photos. Like the entire tank was brown. You kind of just adjust the light, so you have the light on for like 12 hours, and then you slowly sort of dip it down. It's more so experimental. So I had it on for like 12 hours, and I think it's right back to around that 8-hour, 9-hour mark. Yeah, just light duration. You sort of think, well, what are the things that I don't want to do in a planted tank?
Yeah.
That's another way of looking at algae problems. It's like, how can I grow algae? So that's what I did. I had it on quite a long photo period, and then I've just dimmed it back. I've taken it down. Also, 100% intensity on the GRSP series. I've dimmed it back, it's back down to 80%. But I thought
that's
overfeeding, they were eating algae.
It's the Chiro I've got up there as well.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I can only get that up to about 60.
Yeah,
no, it just melts everything in the tank.
Exactly. But I found they weren't eating the algae. Once I started feeding them, they were like, "Oh no, screw the algae. That's too much work. I'm gonna eat the Rapashi. That tastes much better." And so the tank was disgusting, like gross to look at, because they just weren't eating the algae because I was feeding them so much.
I was showing you my fish and my shrimp up here.
Yeah.
I don't feed that. I don't feed that tank a lot at all because there's so many shrimps and snails and algae and decaying, botanicals that the food generates itself. And because they're small fish, it seems to be generating enough to keep everything going at a really steady rate, which is good. But I can't get the algae right.
But that's what I wanted to do. Is I wanted this tank. If I go away on holiday, they're not going to starve.
Yeah,
they can actually sustain themselves. I think I didn't feed them for like 2 weeks because I really wanted to make sure that they were eating the algae. Now my glass lily pipe is completely clean. It's completely clear. Before it was brown because they just weren't touching it. They were too lazy. They're like, it's too much work to go swim up there and munch that algae. I'm just why? I'm just going to sit here. And they come up to the glass now because they're looking for food. And so I was like, no, I'm going to put you to work. You're going to eat some of this algae. Because that's what you're meant to be doing.
So you find them fairly effective for eating algae as long as you don't feed them too much?
Sort of. I want to be careful with that because I feel like one of the issues a lot of people face is they're just not feeding them, not ensuring that they're getting in, because they will exhaust their supply of algae, and they only eat the diatom brown algae, really. I find they're pretty useless at eating any other type of algae. So they're very specific. They like this specific, and like a brown diatom algae is very easy to get rid of because it's largely related to your light intensity and sort of imbalanced tank. Like that's something you can resolve without even adding algae eaters. And that's something I'm really big on with algae issues is, one, my first step is identifying your algae, understanding why it's there, and then addressing those root problems first before you do chemicals, before you add an algae eater. Because an algae eater it's a fish in itself. And if you've got issues with, like, if your root problem is waste, then adding an algae eater in some ways is like contributing to that waste. So I just don't, it feels like sometimes when someone has an algae problem, it's get this algae eater, as opposed to, well, if you just do this and adjust your light, it's going to be good, you know?
It's one thing getting rid of the algae, but if you don't find the source of it, it's just going to be a continuous battle.
And I found that with cyanobacteria, so it's not really an algae, but I found that I was just continually having to dose that ultralife stuff, which absolutely takes it out. But because I wasn't solving the root problem, it would just keep coming back, and that stuff's not cheap. So, you know, and I found that was linked to feeding a lot of whiteworms. So for those with cyanobacteria, whiteworms, I found it to be a trigger. And it's one of the, I get it a bit in that the betta tank, and the one specific area that I feed whiteworms. So I'm still not 100% the relationship between that or the correlation, but it's very interesting because I was like high protein, like sort of whiteworms seem to trigger the cyano. But yeah, so with the hill streams, I mean, let's see if I can, they're all just there munching away. My tips to success is sand, round river rocks to get the most out of them so you can see their behavior. Sand, round river rocks, some flow. I find a difference between flow, but I feel like the whole massive flow thing's blown out of proportion. Like if you see them in the wild, the rivers aren't 100% super, like you have the shallower areas. You'll often find them in these shallower slack water areas. So as long as you have reasonable oxygenation, an area where there is some flow, like where they can go if they want that, rocks, sand, and then make sure you feed them well. Make sure they're getting food and they aren't your algae solution. Because
I find flow a really interesting topic because, like, when you look at riverways, you have like rapids that are rapidly fast. Obviously, once it breaks down from that, it slows down again. But then, like in the rapids, like the water's pushing at this side of the rock, but on this part here, there's not a lot of movement because the water's not getting. So it's like looks insanely fast, but there's definitely dead spots in these bits. And so, like, we use the hill streams for example. They might like lots of flow, and they might be found in rapids, for example. But what parts of the rapids are they tucked into? Is it in the slightly lulls of it, or are they hooked right onto it where it's just?
And I've seen videos of them under waterfalls where they're getting blasted, and I've seen videos of them in the shallow areas on the in the side of the sort of river where it's slack water. I think the most important thing is more so that you provide them with the water is well oxygenated to a degree. It doesn't need to be ridiculous. Like I think they're quite hardy. And even in this tank here, it doesn't look like there's a tremendous amount of flow. But I'm running an Aqua One 1200 aqueous. So on a wee 60 centimeter tank, that's decent.
Quite
It doesn't look like it though, because I don't like to have too much water. Like there's definitely enough water movement, but it's not sloshing. So yeah, no, I find them to be pretty. Once you get those, I think it's like any fish. Once you get the variables that they need to survive and to get the most out of them, they're gonna live for a while. Fish can live for a long time. I mean, even your average tetra could live ideal conditions with no mistakes, 5+ years easily. I've had neon tetras for I've had them live for at least 3+ years before they all started getting this weird white fungus thing and started dying. So yeah, I think I've got to head off soon. I didn't realize the time. It's 10:30.
Sure.
That's fine. And you've probably got the store to open up, don't you? And
yeah, we're getting close. We're getting close.
Yeah.
So I'm into the point where I start clock watching now. So yeah, we're
yeah,
good.
I really enjoyed this talk. Thanks for having me on. Yeah.
Cool.
Look forward
Yeah, it's really cool.
Well, before you shoot off, then we'll do our quick School of Six in, and we can call it a day after that then.
Sure thing. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right. So doing a coin toss, are you heads or tails?
Tails.
Cool. Tea or coffee?
Tea, but I don't drink either, so.
Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
Paper, because most men go rock.
Cool. Are we alone in the universe?
I don't think so. I think like probability, infinite. Yeah.
Cool. If you could have a meal with anybody from any stage in time, alive, dead, fictional, real, who would that be?
A meal. I don't know, Steve Irwin maybe. I don't know. I think he'd be quite funny.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. And what is your unicorn fish?
Is that like a fish that I'd like to have never had kept?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, that's a tough one. Because for a lot of the fish I've already kept, like the betta that you gave me, that killifish that I wanted. It's not a stingray because I got my little streams. Can't think of one really. Maybe there's it's Pseudogastromyzon laticeps. So it's like a little hill stream loach, but has purple fins. Yeah, that'd be my unicorn fish. But
Cool.
I don't really have one though.
And the last one is, where can people find you and what you're doing?
Aquascaping Club New Zealand. I think that's the name I've given it. And I just set up an Instagram because I was like, oh, let's do that. Let's explore that medium. So that's niche fish tanks, I think. Yeah.
Cool.
So no problems.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Thank you so much. You've been
Hope
an
you enjoy the
excellent.
rest of the day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good to talk to you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank everybody for being involved, and hope you enjoy your weekend. And as Brian has just politely mentioned, daylight savings finishes in New Zealand this weekend, so I have to contact next week's guest in case our timings are all wrong. So thank you for reminding me.
Have
All right, everybody.
No bother.
Thank you very much.
a
Have a
good
good one.
weekend, everybody.
Catch you
Bye.
later. Bye.